Hello, it's Mike Levin. Wednesday, September 25th, 2019. I'm once again on my way into the Emerald City. And I thought I would follow on to my last video where I talked about the prospect of actually doing something bigger than punching the daily clock and drawing a salary, given the way the world is going with the internet and all the amazing opportunities for people who have unique things to offer to bring to the world through courses, through product, but also being the type of person who is very much the master carpenter who just really wants to do my thing, exercise my craft, and be happy while doing it. So I'm not really big on the whole freelance thing and all this extra paperwork and marketing oneself and the hustle to drum up customers and business. I've been that route, and in fact all these web tracking and funnel systems that are out there like Google Analytics, I had spun my own back in the day. It was probably 2002 or so at Scala Digital Signage, where I did all that stuff. I actually wrote the pixel that collected the data, and I could track from keyword hit to recurring sales. And that's another thing that's in the category of sort of been there, done that. I've had support liabilities over and over through the years for things I've built, which I don't really get the main benefit of because it was all work for hire for other people. And so that would tend to lead one to the thought, why not do it for myself? I kind of did that with HitTail. It was, again, work for an employer, work for hire, and that was a keyword suggestion tool created back in 2006 that's still going strong today as one of the sort of timeless, evergreen secret weapons of the field of SEO, and a testament to the fact that when you understand the fundamentals, they really do cut across time. And the things that interest me most are these fundamentals that keep one sharp in the industry, always valuable, always able to walk in and, have a job, start drawing a salary at almost any organization at any time. It often leads to the discussion of generalist skills versus specialist skills. It's very easy to be highly paid in some specialized area that you throw yourself into becoming an expert at, but then you are also somewhat uniquely tied to installations, sites, what have you, that use those same very particular technologies and tools and systems that you've become an expert and specialize at. That's happened to me a few times also over the years, and on surprising technologies, things as common and globally applicable as you might think SQL is. But it turns out that Pandas under Python is a more generic and broadly applicable approach to data manipulation. One of the videos that I had put out on YouTube, a viewer asked, why not do your complex work SQL side and then just pull down the results? And I'm like, well, you may not have access to the SQL server. You might just, if it is even a SQL server, there's so many databases out there. How many times have you had to join data from table A from data source 1 with table B from data source 2 and simply not been able to because you can't do a native SQL join between tables from different sources? So with Pandas and Python, you pull down the data from the first source, you pull down the data from the second source, and you do your unions and joins or whatever exactly as you would if it were a local SQL table, but there's no, high tech liability cost of a local SQL installation. Lots of people who work this way install a local instance of MySQL, then go through all the trouble of importing all this data into tables so that they can do this one-time query and then delete the tables afterwards, With pandas, it's in memory, so you are memory bound. And with very large data sets, it can come to be an issue. But again, we're not talking about being the DBA of a company. We're talking about being kind of a data master, doing all the miscellaneous work, a lot of reporting that goes on to leverage your data, and to not be the specialized sysadmin, database admin, or any of these other roles, which, while very worthwhile careers and fields, you become that person in that company doing that thing, usually for many, many years. And if you're going to switch, you're going to have to switch to something that is similar in nature. Yes, it truly is the walk into the Emerald City. I'm up to, by the way, I believe it's book 11 out of 14. 11, no, I'm up to book 12 out of 14 of the original Wizard of Oz books written by L. Frank Baum. And I'm up to the Tin Woodman story, which goes into depth, answering a lot of the questions that people wonder about. How did he become the Tin Woodman? I continue to be impressed by how deeply intuiting and channeling L. Frank Baum is of all the many, things about life that people deal with on an everyday basis. And he takes these complex issues, distills them down into a fun child story, and then gives you powerful imagery and symbols to sort of attach to these complex concepts, which can really serve you throughout life. And that speaks to the process of making sure you do not become excessively specialized to your skill. The specialization is like the technical manual for life, or to a car, or to anything technical, that says, if you see this, do that. And you get really good at going through the moves in almost a static state, a big hierarchy decision tree. And you will, of course, get nuances, because it is firsthand experience after a while, and you recognize patterns and muscle memory kicks in. But when you are not doing the same exact thing every day against the same exact table structures, data sets, tasks that your employers or clients or customers are asking you to do, and it's different every time, you tend to be in a more dynamic state, asking a lot more questions, potentially tackling the problem in different ways, and making use of more and more abstractions, high-level thoughts that simplify very complex matters, so that you can have a fast library lookup index of them in your head. Does this apply? Does that apply? And a lot of times in programming, you'll find these referred to as design patterns. And that's a fairly abused word. I mean, these labels never really do justice to what you're talking about, because when you say design patterns these days, people think of like factory constructors and very Java specific, because the book was written for the Java and C programming languages in mind. And it provides solutions that, give abstract generic answers to make work easier, because that particular work is hard under that language, because the language was not specifically geared towards that problem, or was geared in a slightly different way, so that you have to refactor the language a little bit through the patterns you use. And when you start out with other languages, the design patterns you use, the approaches, the abstractions and generalizations to do your work better, change, sometimes go away. Sometimes these things are built into the language, like iteration is an easy one. And in Python, one of the interesting observations is that there's so many things these days that have built-in iterators, like under the SQL stuff, under Pandas, the Pandas library for Python. Usually things that are looping and iterating through members of a collection are written as single lines that simply apply whatever it's doing to every member of the collection. And you don't write for loops. And the general wisdom is, if you're writing something under Pandas that looks like a for loop, a Python for loop, you're doing it wrong. And try to figure out how to do it as a one-line iterator using the apply method of the data frame combined with a lambda function or an extra Python function, so that the Python function can be applied to every member of a value in a column on a data grid, which is just basically a row and column Excel type table or SQL type table. So what I'm really talking about here is my next steps, what I'm doing as my next level. After probably around 10 years on Linux, Python, Vim, and Git, I'm highly competent at all these things. Most so on Vim, slightly less so on Python, slightly less still on Linux, and least of all on Git, because these things have these deep nuances and unending depth that you can dive into and do all kinds of complex things. I don't need those complex things. I only need certain things out of Git, which is to back up my code and share it with collaborators. And out of Linux, all I need is a place to run my code under all conditions. I can always run my code. When Linux is your operating system platform that you're familiar with, and you write some code, and the question comes up, where do I run my code? There's a very generic standard answer: anywhere where you can run Linux. It can be a Raspberry Pi hardware, $5 hardware device running out of your home. It can be a $5 a month cloud virtual server. It can be all kinds of things. A virtual Linux machine on your desktop, or the Windows Linux subsystem for Linux. Or it could be under Unix on the Macintosh, because Unix and Linux are similar enough that you can usually do that. So you get out of Linux a place to run your code. Python, you get your full expressiveness, your language, reading, writing, arithmetic, and Python, because Python is all that other stuff. And for people who think that it's like an intimidating snake word, all male and macho, cast that aside. Python is a fuzzy, soft language written by tender people who care about you. It's named after Monty Python, not the snake, and the sense of humor of that British comedy troupe cuts through almost all things in Python, giving you a lighthearted, casual attitude in its day-to-day use. And then, of course, Vim, the steepest learning curve and most green arrow muscle memory hunter type tool of the bunch, which is how you do your editing of text. Also the most controversial of the bunch, I recommend. But after about 10 years on all of this stuff, I've come to understand that one of my areas I still need to develop is the abstracted or generic database manipulation. You can do so much under Python directly with the native standard library, the stuff that gets installed with a Python install, but you can't do everything. And it doesn't take long to discover the Pandas library for Python, which gives you all that familiar SQL and Excel-like capability, but under Python. And a lot of stuff that you would traditionally do as loops becomes single-line iterators. You learn some new data types that are almost considered core data types, data frames and sequences, the way that lists, dictionaries, and tuples have that status under just native Python. You're adding to that mix data frames, which are your row and column tables, and series, which are essentially single columns of a data frame, kind of like arrays. You start to get familiar more with things like NumPys, numeric arrays, and other things, because Pandas leans heavily on a library called NumPy, which is a high-performance matrix analysis and calculator that was written in native C for Python to do a lot of the data science type stuff that is traditionally in history done under the Fortran, one of the granddaddies of all languages. So Fortran and COBOL and Assembler and a couple of other these languages are the ones that go back forever and ever. And they never quite go away because they all met some fundamental. They hit some fundamental of some kind or another. And Fortran hit the fundamental of number crunching, lots of numbers. NumPy is Python's solution to that kind of rocket science number crunching. Pandas depends on, relies heavily on, and is greatly compatible with NumPy. So when you learn Pandas, you're getting all that lovely SQL stuff, plus a lot of rocket science stuff. And it's a whole nother area of learning. I might not break it out into as big of a category as Linux, Python, Vim, or Git, but certainly as my next level of development, where I'm trying to turn myself into sort of a master carpenter of the next level, the next tool, the next power tool, it is the Pandas data library under Python. And I got to get it into my fingers. I got to think in it. I got to use the .loc and the .iloc methods of the data frame more. Know when they're not appropriate to use the old shortcuts, which are going out of style and are greatly deprecated, but still too tasty to not use here and there to make simple things simple. And when requests come up, just be able to bippity-boppity-boo, meet that request. And I had a large one lately, which I actually made some promises and delivered on it, much to my delight, because these are things that seems like they should be easy. I would know how to do them under SQL, and they all have the equivalents under Pandas. So I researched, found they did, and got it all done. So my next level of development is to sort of master all that Pandas stuff. And what I'm doing here with you, my YouTube audience, more generically, is to bring you through a similar journey, to build you up through each and every one of these tools so that you can have this stuff, which is kind of old school, but timelessly applicable, cuts across all problem domains, always at your disposal, always making you valuable, and always giving you sort of an alternative approach to being that master carpenter in today's and tomorrow's world, where when you scratch right under the surface, you're always going to find this old school stuff. Getting the system started, getting it booted, and oftentimes running the whole picture if it is graphics-free headless server, which is so much of the things these days. Well, anyway, thanks for joining me. Hope to talk to you soon, and don't forget to subscribe.